Hi everyone, Hirsch Sar here, reporting from Auckland, New Zealand. Today is the 3rd of March 2024, and here's certainly a very interesting subject, especially one that's popped up again and again and again throughout the decades. And it's really one about being a so-called survivalist. Of course, we should always have emergency supplies on hand. I know, much easier said than done. Not just paying for them, but also organizing them and keeping them, how do you put it, sort of updated. If you do have, for example, canned food, replacing it when it goes off. If you do have water stored in tanks, again, replacing it when it becomes old or supposedly goes off, things like that. But yes, we should always have things on hand, just off the top of my head. Basically, yes, food for probably maybe 3 to 5 days for everyone in the household, and just canned food will do, say, approximately 1 can per meal, therefore being 3 cans per person per day. Just basic canned food would do. Of course, it doesn't have to be the ultimate and fine cuisine. Obviously, having some water stored in, say, milk bottles or other, sort of tanks to drink, and maybe even just for basic hygiene. If the water is gone for a period of time, and then of course. First aid kit. Of course, we should always have, spare clothes and blankets. You should have that basically anyway. What else would there be? I guess that is more or less, and I think other things like torches, the device where it's a radio and a torch in one, and you can wind it up to recharge it. On that note, batteries. That's probably still the beginning of a whole list, and of course it's up to you how sort of deep you want to go or how much you want to be prepared. But of course, it's always good to be prepared because chances are, minor sort of disasters will occur every so often in life, maybe every few years, something like a massive power cut in your area and you've got no power for a few days, or the same thing with water, or, perhaps from a climate event, you're cut off from the rest of civilization for so many days. But also there are things like major disasters, which really do keep us up at night. And unfortunately, there are so many, potential major disasters that can occur, be it tsunami or volcanic eruption or a massive earthquake, an asteroid hitting the Earth, a global pandemic, as we saw in very, very recent history, global pandemic, or even an invasion by another country because something has happened by them. On that note, war becoming, much bigger than usual or much bigger than it's been in sort of recent decades. And of course, we're reminded, well, not reminded, we think of the Russian invasion of the Ukraine that started in February 2022. Unfortunately, today in March 2024 is still going. The Hamas invasion, of Palestine as well, the Hamas invasion there of Palestine and Gaza, sorry, and that's only been going since the beginning of October 2023. But still, geez, how much harm has been done, how many people have been killed, and it's unfortunately still going to this day. So there are those things, and I remember hearing that reading in the paper, reading on the news, I think only about a couple of months ago or a few months ago or so, that the doomsday clock has been set at 90 seconds to midnight, which is the closest it's been since the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, when of course the Americans and the Soviet Union were very close to nuclear warfare. And as the Soviet Union had placed nuclear missiles in Cuba and had them aimed at American cities, while the Americans then placed some of their nuclear missiles in Turkey, being very close to Eastern Europe, which was occupied by the Soviet Union at the time, and therefore part of them. But eventually, thank God, President of the US at the time, John F. Kennedy, and the Premier of the Soviet Union, being Nikita Khrushchev at the time, came to an agreement that, if Kennedy removes his missiles from Turkey, then Khrushchev will remove his from Cuba, and thank God they did come to an agreement. But otherwise, they were very close to all-out nuclear war on that fateful day back in 1962. But yeah, today, the doomsday clock being set at 90 seconds to midnight, the closest it's been since that day, all the way back in 1962. It's obviously not a good thing. And again, there are so many, potential bad things that can happen. But I'm sure you've you're well aware of that, and you've heard about that, and what it can do to society, how it can make society break down, even the world break down, bring down the world economy and all that, and turn people into refugees who are absolutely struggling, just to keep alive, and obviously never underestimate human beings when they're struggling. And there are so many scenes and movies that remind us of that. But just an interesting point, or just a thought, which is really the main point of this talk video. And don't mean to be negative or anything, but I remember reading in one book, it was saying how this was a book called Doomsday, 50 versions of the end of the world, and I think it came out in 2009 or around there. And I read it, and it really did, fascinate me. And I remember at the end of one of its chapters talking about one of the potential ways the world could come to an end. And it was talking about one chapter being about oil reserves being exhausted, or basically oil running out, and the world economy coming to a grinding, screeching halt. And you can imagine the implications then. But I remember at the end of that chapter, this book saying, warning, to those of you who want to survive the global slim down this century to 2 billion, if I remember correctly, it said, it is best not to live in a city. But for those of you who feel that is not worth living in a world in terminal decline, stay where you are. And I remember thinking, geez, that's actually a very, very, very good point. Just that point alone. I mean, of course, we all want to survive. We all want to live as long as possible. It's a basic, it's a basic human instinct, or a basic human desire, just like with any living thing. And we'll do whatever we can to to survive, to live. But it does make you think, even if you did survive, say a major disaster like an asteroid hitting the Earth and wiping out a lot of the planet, if not all of it, or there being something like nuclear warfare, or a global pandemic, and again wiping out most of the human race, or most of the world. And if you were, I guess, lucky enough to survive that, but what could happen to where you are, even if you're in an area that survived things going back decades, potentially centuries, even 1,000 years, going back not just to the industrial age, but even to the agrarian age, where every day it's all about just trying to, grow food, and, and you're probably feeding off rainwater, and, hygiene standards have gone back. You can't wash clothes as often as anymore. You can't shower every day. Medical care has gone out the window. Perhaps even no electricity. Think about even just that alone would do. I mean, you might think, it'll be great to survive, to survive a huge global disaster, but would you really want to live in a world like that? A world, as our book said, in terminal decline, especially after, living, where you are now, where you've got pretty much everything at your fingertips, and the basics are pretty easy to come by. It really makes you think, would you really want to live in a world like that? Or would you maybe consider those who had died as perhaps the, again, lucky ones? It really does make you think. And it actually reminds me of something similar my father told me. My father, who grew up in sort of, a child in I think in the 50s, basically, and, teenager in the 60s. And of course, he lived in a very poor part at the time of northeastern India, the state of Bihar. That's the part of India that touches Nepal. So he lived in Bihar, in India, back in those days when India was a poor country. It might be a thriving upcoming superpower now, but it was very poor back in those days. And he was actually saying to me, it's interesting because he went from east to west, and he also went from pretty poor to fairly wealthy. So east to west, pretty poor to fairly wealthy, and basically, if you like, from industrial age to information age. So he told me what's so interesting is that he kind of more or less started at the bottom in terms of wealth, technology, all that, and he basically rose to the top. And then he's saying what's interesting with you is that you have basically started at the top, and the way things are going, does that mean you'll come to the bottom? And again, it just really made me think, all these things that I take for granted, that I'm used to, running water, electricity, appliances, computers, the internet, being able to wash my clothes whenever I want, be able to have a shower whenever I want, medical care being there no matter what, just all those things that, I take for granted like most people, really makes you think, suddenly if they're gone, or most of it's gone, would you really want to live in such a world, especially after experiencing the current one? Again, something that will at least hopefully make you think, even if just for 30 seconds or 60 seconds. But yeah, so again, even if you did survive, a global, you know, something, a global disaster, and we're living in such a post-apocalyptic world in so-called terminal decline, yes, you might think yourself lucky for surviving, but would you really want to live in such a world after living in this world? Again, something to really think about. Thank you.